Private First Class Dana Keller adjusted her gear for the third time that morning, each buckle and strap positioned with the meticulous precision that had become her trademark. At 24, with 3 combat tours already behind her dust-covered boots, she remained the youngest member of her squad at Forward Operating Base Liberty. The morning briefing had left a familiar bitter taste in her mouth. Intelligence gathering mission, Colonel Morrison had announced, his steel-gray eyes deliberately avoiding Dana's section of the briefing room. 4 armored vehicles, 8 carefully selected soldiers, 1 high-value target requiring immediate evacuation from hostile territory. The word selected hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, and Dana knew exactly what it meant. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez leaned closer to her after the briefing. "He fought hard to keep you off this mission, Keller. Word is he thinks you're not aggressive enough for close contact scenarios." Rodriguez kept his voice low, but not so low that others couldn't hear. "Says you demonstrate excessive caution during high-risk decision-making." Dana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For 18 months, she had conducted overwatch duties without missing a single critical detail. She had never displayed panic or poor judgment during combat situations, regardless of how chaotic circumstances became. Her performance record spoke for itself, but apparently that wasn't enough for Colonel Morrison. "The squad specifically requested you, though," Rodriguez continued, checking his own equipment with less precision than Dana had shown. "That's got to count for something." But Dana had been in the military long enough to understand how these things worked. Requests from enlisted personnel carried weight only when they aligned with what the commanding officers already wanted. When they conflicted, the requests became suggestions that could be easily ignored. The narrow mountain canyon stretched ahead of them like a scar across the landscape, its walls rising sharply on both sides. Intelligence reports had indicated the route was clear of enemy activity and improvised explosive devices. Dana found herself studying every shadow, every rock formation, every potential hiding spot with the intensity that had kept her alive through 3 previous deployments. "Stay sharp, people," came Morrison's voice through the radio communication system. "Maintain radio silence and follow predetermined routes." This should be routine. Should be. Dana had learned to pay attention to phrases like that. In her experience, operations that should be routine had a tendency to become anything but routine. She adjusted her position in the second vehicle of the convoy formation, keeping her weapon ready and her eyes constantly moving across the terrain. The convoy entered the canyon precisely at 4 in the morning, maintaining the careful spacing and tactical formation that had been drilled into them during countless training exercises. The pre-dawn darkness provided cover, but it also concealed potential threats that daylight might have revealed. Dana's instincts were screaming at her, though she couldn't identify exactly why. Something about the canyon felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty, too perfect for an ambush. She had learned to trust those instincts over the course of her deployments, even when she couldn't articulate the specific reasons for her concern. "Keller," Morrison's voice crackled through her headset with obvious irritation. "Stop scanning. Like you're expecting trouble. Intelligence says the route is clear." She wanted to respond that intelligence was sometimes wrong, that overconfidence had killed more soldiers than enemy fire, that her job was to watch for threats regardless of what reports indicated. Instead, she keyed her radio once to acknowledge the transmission and continued her systematic observation of their surroundings. Rodriguez caught her eye and nodded slightly, understanding passing between them without words. He had seen Dana's instincts prove correct too many times to dismiss her concerns, even when their commanding officer seemed determined to ignore them. The canyon walls seemed to close in around them as they progressed deeper into the narrow passage. Dana found herself calculating fields of fire, identifying potential cover positions, and mentally rehearsing immediate action drills that she hoped would never be necessary. 7 minutes after entering the canyon, her worst fears materialized. With explosive violence, the improvised explosive device buried beneath the road surface detonated directly under the lit vehicle with a force that sent the 3-ton armored transport flipping completely over like a child's toy. The thunderous explosion echoed off the canyon walls, followed immediately by the distinctive crack of rifle fire from concealed positions on both sides of their route. Dana was moving before the dust settled. "Stay in your assigned position, Keller." Morrison's voice cut through the chaos with unmistakable authority and anger. "Casualty evacuation is not your designated responsibility." But Dana had already committed to her course of action. While other squad members sought defensive positions or attempted to establish communication with their command post, she was sprinting toward the overturned lead vehicle to what had instantly become kill zone. Staff Sergeant Mendez was trapped halfway out of the wreckage, his plate carrier snagged on twisted metal, blood streaming down his face from a head wound. Enemy fire was concentrating on the overturned vehicle, sending sparks flying off the armored hull and kicking up sprays of dirt and rock fragments around the casualties. Dana reached Mendez and grabbed his plate carrier, hauling him away from the burning wreckage with strength that surprised both of them. She dragged him behind the limited cover provided by their own vehicle's rear axle, her movements quick and efficient despite the incoming fire. "You're hit," Mendez gasped, pointing at her left shoulder where blood was already soaking through her uniform. Dana hadn't even felt the impact of the rifle round that had found its mark while she was pulling him to safety. Adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic, but she knew the pain would come later. Right now, there were more casualties who needed immediate assistance. Specialist Carter was 20 meters away, trapped in the open with a leg wound that was bleeding heavily. Enemy forces had concentrated their fire on his position, keeping him pinned down and unable to reach cover. Every few seconds, automatic weapon fire would rake the ground around him, forcing him to press himself flatter against the rocky terrain. "Carter!" Dana called out, calculating the distance and the timing she would need to reach him. "When I move, you move toward me. Keller, get back to your position." Morrison's voice crackled through the radio again, but she had already committed to her next action. She sprinted across the open ground in a zigzag pattern, staying low and using every available piece of cover. Enemy fire followed her movement, bullets striking the ground where she had been a split second earlier. She reached Carter just as a burst of automatic weapon fire swept across their position. Dana threw herself on top of Carter, using her own body to shield him from the incoming rounds. She felt another impact, this one in her back, the force of it driving the breath from her lungs. But she held her position, covering Carter until the immediate burst of fire passed. "Can you move?" she asked, her voice steady despite the pain that was beginning to make itself known. Carter nodded, though his face was pale from blood loss and shock. Together, they began moving toward better cover, Dana supporting his weight while maintaining awareness of enemy positions and incoming fire. The firefight continued for what felt like hours, but was actually only 12 minutes. Dana found herself holding the lower defensive perimeter of the canyon, using only her personal weapon, 3 magazines of ammunition, and no backup support from other squad members who were pinned down by enemy fire. When close air support finally arrived, the enemy forces withdrew as quickly as they had appeared, melting back into the rocky terrain like ghosts. The sudden silence that followed the intense combat was almost more unsettling than the gunfire had been. Dana was still in her defensive position, weapon trained on the canyon walls, when the medics physically removed her from the rocky cover she had maintained throughout the firefight. Only then did she realize she had been bleeding from multiple wounds and was running purely on adrenaline and determination. 3 soldiers seriously wounded, the senior medic reported over the radio. 2 lost consciousness from blood loss and trauma. We need immediate medical evacuation. As Dana was loaded onto the evacuation transport, she caught sight of Morrison's face. His expression was unreadable, but she could see something calculating in his eyes that made her stomach clench with anticipation of what was coming next. The forward operating base medical facility smelled of antiseptic and industrial cleaning supplies, a sterile environment that felt alien after the dust and cordite of the canyon ambush. Dana sat on the edge of an examination table while a Navy corpsman finished stitching the shoulder wound that had nearly missed her subclavian artery by less than an inch. "You're lucky," hospital corpsman 3rd Class Williams observed, securing the final suture with practiced efficiency. "Few millimeters to the left, and you'd be looking at major vascular surgery instead of field stitches." Dana nodded absently, her attention focused on the hushed conversations taking place just outside the medical bay. She could hear Morrison's voice, elevated and agitated, discussing the mission's outcome with someone whose responses were too quiet to distinguish. Private Keller, Morrison appeared in the doorway, his uniform still dusty from the canyon, but his bearing rigid with military authority. "Report to the main briefing room in 30 minutes for mandatory after-action debriefing." Something in his tone made Williams pause in his documentation of her injuries. The corpsman had been around long enough to recognize when a routine debriefing was going to be anything but routine. "Sir," Dana responded, maintaining proper military courtesy, despite the growing sense of unease that was settling in her stomach like a cold stone. "And Keller," Morrison added, his voice carrying a sharp edge that hadn't been there during previous interactions. "Make sure you understand the difference between following orders and freelancing during combat operations. That distinction might be important during our discussion." After Morrison left, Williams continued his work in silence for several minutes before speaking quietly. "Mendez and Carter are going to be okay, by the way. Carter's already asking when he can return to duty, and Mendez wants to know if you're getting written up for saving his life." Dana's jaw muscles tensed visibly. "Am I getting written up?" Williams shrugged, but his expression suggested he had heard things that concerned him. "Above my pay grade, but I'll tell you this. I've been patching up soldiers for 8 years, and I've never seen anyone take fire like you did today and keep functioning. That takes guts." The 30-minute deadline arrived too quickly. Dana made her way to the main briefing room where the entire unit had assembled for what Morrison had described as a post-mission analysis. The room felt different than usual. The conversations were more subdued, and several senior non-commissioned officers were present who typically wouldn't attend routine debriefings. Morrison stood at the front of the room, his posture rigid, with authority and barely contained anger. When Dana entered and took her position near the back, the conversations died completely, leaving an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. "Private Keller," Morrison began, his voice carrying the kind of authority that could end military careers and destroy professional reputations. "You deliberately violated direct orders during a combat operation." Dana assumed the position of attention and remained silent, understanding that any attempt to defend her actions would be interpreted as insubordination and disrespect for command authority. "You abandoned your assigned position in direct contravention of my explicit instructions," Morrison continued, his criticism delivered with surgical precision designed to humiliate her in front of her peers. "You drew concentrated enemy fire to your location and compromised the convoy's established fallback defensive line." The briefing room fell into uncomfortable silence as every soldier present recognized that they were witnessing something that went far beyond a professional evaluation of tactical decisions made under extreme pressure. "I should recommend you for court-martial proceedings on charges of reckless endangerment and willful disobedience of lawful orders," Morrison declared, his voice rising with righteous indignation that felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Dana's breathing remained steady, but her knuckles had gone white where her hands were clasped behind her back. She stared straight ahead, maintaining military bearing while Morrison systematically dismantled her actions and her character in front of everyone she served with. "Your actions during that ambush made you a deadly burden to your unit," Morrison continued, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "Those men almost died because of your reckless behavior and poor judgment." The words hung in the air, like smoke from a funeral pyre, and Dana felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not anger. She had expected Morrison's criticism and could handle professional disagreement about tactical decisions. This was something deeper and more damaging. A deliberate character assassination designed to destroy her reputation and credibility within the unit. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his chair near the back of the room, his expression suggesting he wanted to contribute information that might provide context for Dana's actions, but speaking without permission during a formal disciplinary proceeding would result in immediate punishment, and everyone in the room understood that Morrison was looking for any excuse to expand his targets. Dana maintained her military bearing, offering no verbal response to accusations that she knew were both unfair and factually incorrect. But her silence wasn't submission. It was calculation. She was beginning to understand that Morrison's attack was too personal, too vicious, and too public to be simply about tactical disagreements. Lieutenant Hayes, the unit's intelligence officer, was taking notes with unusual attention to detail. His presence at what should have been a routine debriefing suggested that Morrison's accusations might have consequences that extended beyond simple disciplinary action. Furthermore, Morrison continued, apparently building towards some predetermined conclusion, Private Keller's pattern of disregarding established protocols and substituting her own judgment for that of her superiors demonstrates a fundamental unsuitability for continued service in a combat environment. The medical bay doors at the rear of the briefing room suddenly burst open with dramatic force, interrupting Morrison's prepared speech. Both Mendez and Carter entered under their own power, Mendez leaning heavily on Carter for support despite Carter's obvious leg injury. An intravenous medication bag was still taped to Mendez's arm, and both men were clearly in considerable pain. Morrison's face went through several rapid color changes as he processed the unexpected arrival of the two soldiers, whose testimony would completely contradict the narrative he had been constructing. Carter stepped forward despite his injury, making direct eye contact with Morrison with the kind of fearless intensity that comes from someone who has recently faced death and survived because of another person's courage. "With permission to speak freely, sir," Carter requested, his voice carrying a combination of respect for military protocol and absolute determination to be heard regardless of Morrison's response. Morrison hesitated, clearly recognizing that whatever Carter intended to say would not support his assessment of Dana's performance during the mission. But refusing to allow testimony from wounded soldiers would look suspicious and potentially career-damaging. "Permission granted," Morrison replied reluctantly. "She didn't almost get us killed, sir," Carter stated with unwavering conviction. His voice cracked with emotion as he continued. "She covered my body with her own when the shooting started. I watched her take a bullet meant for me." Mendez nodded emphatically despite the obvious pain that movement caused him. "Colonel, we wouldn't be standing here if she had followed your orders to stay in the vehicle. She pulled me from burning wreckage while taking enemy fire." Morrison's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. His prepared condemnation of Dana's actions suddenly rendered not just inappropriate, but potentially career-damaging for himself rather than for the soldier he had been attempting to discipline. Something unexpected began happening throughout the briefing room. One by one, other soldiers who had participated in the mission or witnessed its aftermath began adding their own testimony about Dana's actions during the ambush. But Dana remained motionless throughout this spontaneous defense, hands folded behind her back, posture straight and professional, showing no emotion or reaction to the testimonials being offered on her behalf. She hadn't expected anyone to speak up for her, and their support was both gratifying and concerning. Morrison wouldn't forget who had contradicted his judgment. The testimony continued to build like a gathering storm, each soldier's account, adding another layer of credibility to Dana's actions and further undermining Morrison's narrative. Even the unit medic, who typically avoided involvement in disciplinary matters that didn't directly relate to medical care, felt compelled to contribute information. When Mendez and Carter arrived at the aid station, Corman Williams reported, his voice carrying the professional authority of someone who had treated hundreds of combat casualties. The first thing both of them said wasn't about their own injuries or the enemy ambush. They immediately asked me to check on Keller because she had taken rounds while protecting them. Morrison's face had progressed from red to pale to an unhealthy grayish color as the weight of testimony accumulated against his assessment. Lafindant. Hayes was taking detailed notes of every statement, his documentation suggesting that this debriefing had become something much more significant than anyone had anticipated. She maintained defensive fire for 12 minutes against superior enemy forces, while the rest of us were pinned down and unable to return effective fire. Sergeant Thompson added, his voice carrying obvious admiration for courage under pressure that exceeded normal expectations. Major Patterson, who had been observing the proceedings from the side of the room, approached Morrison and spoke quietly but audibly enough for others to hear. Sir, I recommend we conclude this debriefing session and conduct any additional investigation through appropriate channels. Morrison's authority had been fundamentally undermined by evidence that his assessment of the situation had been both inaccurate and unfair to a soldier who had demonstrated exceptional courage and competence under combat conditions. The room watched in uncomfortable silence as he gathered his notes and prepared to leave. This debriefing is concluded, Morrison announced, his voice lacking the authority and conviction it had carried earlier. All personnel are dismissed. He left the briefing room without offering any apology to Dana or acknowledging that his criticism had been inappropriate and potentially harmful to unit morale and cohesion. The silence that followed his departure was filled with unspoken questions about what would happen next. Dana turned to follow Morrison, apparently intending to continue the conversation privately or perhaps to accept whatever additional punishment he might choose to impose. But Carter reached out and gently caught her wrist. Don't, he said firmly. You've already done more than enough. Let it go. Rodriguez approached after most of the other soldiers had left the briefing room. That was ugly, he observed, keeping his voice low. Morrison made it personal, and that's not going to be forgotten. Dana understood the implications. Military units were small communities where reputations and relationships could make the difference between effective teamwork and dangerous dysfunction. Morrison's public attack on her character had created divisions that would affect unit cohesion. Long after the immediate controversy was resolved. What happens now? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Now we wait and see who has more influence upstairs, Rodriguez replied. Morrison's got rank and connections. But he also just humiliated himself in front of witnesses who aren't going to forget what they saw today. That evening, a folded piece of paper appeared under Dana's door, delivered by someone who chose to remain anonymous rather than risk being identified as the source of what appeared to be an acknowledgement of error. The handwriting was unmistakably familiar, though no signature was provided. The note was brief and carefully worded. You made the right tactical decision under impossible circumstances. I made the wrong judgment about your actions and your character. Dana read the note once, then burned it completely. understanding that some acknowledgments of error are more valuable when they remain private rather than becoming public admissions that might damage the command structure that everyone depended on for survival. 2 weeks after the ambush incident and its controversial aftermath, Dana received official notification through military personnel channels that would fundamentally change the trajectory of her military career. The orders arrived in a standard manila envelope, but their contents were anything but standard. Immediate transfer to an elite special operations unit that typically recruited only from personnel with extensive combat experience and documented leadership capabilities under extreme pressure. Additionally, she had been selected for accelerated promotion consideration and fast-track enrollment in the non-commissioned officer development program. The documentation included a formal commendation for exceptional performance during combat operations, though the specific details of her actions during the ambush were classified and would not become part of her public service record. Dana received this life-changing news without comment or visible emotion, understanding that recognition often comes with complications and responsibilities that can be more challenging than the anonymity she had previously enjoyed. Rodriguez found her in the equipment storage area where she was preparing her personal gear for transport to her new assignment. "Word travels fast around here," he observed, examining the transfer orders she had left on a nearby table. "Elite Special Operations Unit. That's not the kind of assignment that gets handed out as consolation prizes." "I never requested any medals or special assignments," Dana replied, her tone suggesting that public acknowledgement of her service was less important to her than the knowledge that her actions had saved lives. "Doesn't matter what you requested," Rodriguez responded. "Sometimes the system actually works the way it's supposed to. Morrison tried to destroy your career, but all he did was draw attention to what you're capable of under pressure." At the airstrip where she prepared to depart for her new assignment, Specialist Carter approached while she was securing her personal equipment for transport. His leg injury was healing well, though he still walked with a slight limp that might never completely disappear. "Mendez and I submitted paperwork recommending you for a Bronze Star with Valor device," he informed her, his voice carrying obvious pride in her achievements and gratitude for her actions during the mission. "I never asked for recognition," Dana replied, checking the security of her equipment one final time. "Doesn't matter what you asked for," Carter responded, echoing Rodriguez's earlier observation. "You didn't ask to get shot either, but you stepped up when the rest of us couldn't move. That kind of courage deserves official recognition whether you want it or not." Mendez approached, having been cleared for limited duty despite still being on restricted activity due to his injuries. "The medal isn't really for you anyway," he added with the kind of blunt honesty that characterized their unit's communication style. "It's for the next person who finds themselves in an impossible situation and needs to know that doing the right thing will eventually be acknowledged, even if it takes time." Dana acknowledged their gesture with a single nod, then boarded the transport aircraft that would carry her to her new assignment and the next phase of her military career. Through the small window, she could see the forward operating base growing smaller as the aircraft gained altitude, taking her away from the controversy and toward opportunities she had never imagined possible. The flight gave her time to process the events of the past few weeks and consider what they meant for her future in the military. Morrison's attempt to destroy her career had backfired spectacularly, but she understood that success often creates new challenges and expectations that can be more demanding than the obstacles they replace. Colonel Morrison never spoke to Dana again, though military personnel who served under his command reported that his approach to evaluating soldier performance became noticeably more careful and thorough following the incident that had exposed his poor judgment. Word of his public humiliation had spread through military networks with the efficiency that characterizes information sharing within professional communities where competence and character are valued above rank or seniority. Dana's new assignment with the Elite Special Operations Unit introduced her to challenges and responsibilities that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. The selection process for such units typically required years of documented performance and multiple recommendations from senior officers. Her accelerated entry into this exclusive community was unprecedented. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hayes, her new commanding officer, reviewed Dana's service record during their initial meeting with obvious interest and approval. "Your actions during the canyon ambush have become something of a case study in tactical decision-making under extreme pressure," she observed. "Morrison's attempt to discipline you for saving lives has generated considerable discussion at levels well above his pay grade. The training regimen for special operations personnel was designed to identify and eliminate candidates who lacked the mental toughness and physical capabilities required for the most demanding military assignments." Dana approached each challenge with the same methodical preparation and calm determination that had characterized her performance during the ambush. Her reputation within the new unit developed quickly, based not on the controversy that had brought her to their attention, but on her consistent performance during training exercises and her ability to maintain effectiveness under conditions that broke other candidates. "She doesn't talk about what happened in that canyon," observed Master Sergeant Williams during a training evaluation session. "But she doesn't need to. Her actions during exercises tell us everything we need to know about how she performs when things go wrong." The Bronze Star with Valor device that Carter and Mendez had recommended was approved through channels, though the ceremony was private and the citation carefully worded to avoid revealing classified operational details. Dana accepted the recognition with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her response to Morrison's criticism. Word of Dana's actions during the ambush continued to spread through military networks, serving as a reminder that heroism often emerges from unexpected sources, and that the most important military virtues, courage, selflessness, and loyalty to fellow soldiers, cannot be predicted based on superficial characteristics or conventional expectations. The next time someone referred to her as a rookie or questioned her capabilities based on her age or physical appearance, they did so quietly and with the understanding that their assessment might be challenged by people who had witnessed her performance under conditions that revealed true character. Her accelerated promotion to sergeant came through ahead of schedule, accompanied by assignment as a team leader responsible for training junior personnel in the same skills and mindset that had enabled her to save lives during the canyon ambush. Dana's first training session with new recruits focused on decision-making under pressure and the importance of maintaining situational awareness even when following orders from superiors who might not have complete information about developing threats. "Your primary responsibility is to your fellow soldiers," she told the group of young faces looking up at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "Sometimes that means following orders exactly as given. Sometimes it means making split-second decisions that might contradict those orders. Learning to tell the difference is what separates good soldiers from dead soldiers." 5 years after the canyon ambush, Dana found herself back at Forward Operating Base Liberty as part of a routine consultation mission. The base had changed significantly. New construction, different personnel, updated equipment, but the essential character of the place remained familiar. She was walking past the main briefing room when she heard a voice she recognized delivering what sounded like a standard safety briefing to newly arrived personnel. Through the open doorway, she could see Colonel Morrison, now wearing the insignia of a full-bird colonel, addressing a group of young soldiers. Risk assessment is an ongoing process that requires constant attention to changing circumstances, Morrison was saying, his voice carrying the authority of experience and hard-learned lessons. Sometimes the soldier on the ground has information that command doesn't have. Good leaders listen to input from all sources before making tactical decisions. Dana paused in the doorway, surprised by the change in Morrison's approach to leadership and tactical instruction. The arrogant certainty that had characterized his previous style had been replaced by something more thoughtful and inclusive. Morrison noticed her presence and nodded acknowledgement, though neither of them spoke. The moment passed quickly, but Dana understood that the events in that canyon had changed both of their careers in fundamental ways. Later that day, she encountered Rodriguez in the base dyeing facility. He had been promoted to Master Sergeant and was now responsible for training and evaluating junior non-commissioned officers. "Heard you made Major," Rodriguez observed, examining the oak leaves on Dana's collar with obvious satisfaction. "Special Operations Command. That's impressive career progression for someone who started out being called a rookie." "The work is challenging," Dana replied, avoiding discussion of the specific assignments that had contributed to her rapid advancement through the ranks. "Morrison's changed," Rodriguez continued, lowering his voice slightly. "Word is that what happened during your debriefing became a case study in leadership failure that gets taught at the Command and Staff College. He's never discussed it publicly, but people who served with him before and after say the difference is dramatic." Dana understood the implications. Military careers were often defined by single moments that reveal character and judgment under pressure. Morrison's attempt to destroy her reputation had become the defining moment of his own career, a reminder that leadership required wisdom and humility as well as authority. The story of the canyon ambush had become part of the institutional memory of multiple units, serving as a teaching example of courage under fire and the importance of supporting subordinates who demonstrate exceptional performance in dangerous situations. New soldiers arriving at Forward Operating Base Liberty were briefed on the incident as part of their orientation, though Dana's name was never mentioned in the official accounts. The focus was on principles rather than personalities. The importance of initiative during combat operations, the value of soldiers who think independently while maintaining team cohesion, and the responsibility of leaders to recognize and support exceptional performance even when it challenges conventional expectations. Dana's final day at the base coincided with a memorial service for soldiers who had been killed in action during recent operations. She stood with hundreds of other service members, listening to speeches about sacrifice and service and the bonds that connected all of them, regardless of rank or assignment. During the ceremony, she noticed Carter and Mendez in the crowd, both now senior non-commissioned officers with their own leadership responsibilities. They acknowledged her presence with subtle nods, understanding passing between them that required no words. The canyon where everything had changed was visible in the distance, its rocky walls unchanged by the passage of time and the human dramas that had played out within its narrow confines. Dana looked toward those walls and felt a sense of closure that had been building slowly over the years since that terrible and transformative day. She understood now that the ambush had been more than a combat engagement. It had been a test of character that revealed who she was and who she was capable of becoming. Morrison's attempt to destroy her had instead forced her to discover strength and resilience that might otherwise have remained hidden. As she prepared to leave Forward Operating Base Liberty for what would probably be the final time, Dana reflected on the unpredictable nature of military service and the way that single moments of decision could reshape entire careers and lives. The men she had shielded in that canyon had gone on to successful military careers of their own, carrying with them the knowledge that courage and competence could emerge from unexpected sources when circumstances demanded them. Morrison had learned that leadership required more than authority and that wisdom sometimes came from admitting mistakes rather than compounding them. And Dana had discovered that reputation was built not through politics or self-promotion, but through consistent performance when the stakes were highest and the pressure was greatest. The rookie, who had been dismissed as too small and too cautious, had become a leader, whose judgment was trusted with the most challenging assignments and the most critical decisions. The transport that would carry her to her next assignment was waiting on the flight line, its engines already turning as crews prepared for departure. Dana boarded the aircraft and took a seat near the window, watching the landscape scroll past below as they gained altitude and distance from the place where her career had nearly ended and ultimately been transformed. She had never asked for recognition or advancement, but she had earned both through actions that spoke louder than words and demonstrated values that transcended rank and hierarchy. The story of the canyon ambush would continue to be told long after all the participants had completed their military service, serving as a reminder that true heroism often emerges from the most unlikely sources when circumstances demand courage, competence, and character. The aircraft banked toward their destination, carrying Dana toward new challenges and responsibilities that would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But she faced the future with confidence born from experience, knowing that she had already proven herself capable of making the right decisions when everything was on the line and the stakes couldn't be higher. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.